If you don't have a Bible, there should be a red Bible around you. We'd love for you to have that. That's our gift to you. If you would turn to 1 Timothy 6, 17 through 19. 1 Timothy 6, 17 through 19. Page 1177 in that red Bible. It says this, verse 17. Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. In this way, they will lay up treasures for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life. So, since we have our kids in here, I want to catch them up. Some of you maybe have missed a week. I'm sure if you were here, you know exactly everything I said. You've memorized it, but just in case, I want to refresh your memory. Week 1, I gave you good news and bad news, and the good news is that you are rich. Yes. So we talked about this idea that you are rich. Now, you may not feel rich. When you look around, you may not look rich, but we are rich. We talked about that week 1. That if you make over $33,000, and I know not everyone in here does, but as a household, if you make that, you're in the top 1% of wage earners in the world. You're rich. And then I gave you some bad news, and that is you are rich. So good news, you're rich. Bad news, you're rich. When you're rich, it's really hard to fully depend on God. It's really hard to fully depend on God if you have a lot of wealth, if you are rich, and we know that we are rich. So we look to our wealth, to our money for our safety, for our security, for our happiness, and that's bad news because it will let us down. Our riches causes distractions. We worry about those things that we have. We fear not having enough when we already have enough. We talked about this first world problems. I've even encountered those in my life the last couple of weeks, but these ideas that only affect us in the first world, not in the developing countries, not in the third world, but only us. Last night, my son, who is 4, he goes to bed. If you have little kids, you know the routine you go through. There's always a couple things they want to do before they go to sleep, and so I leave the room, I shut the door, and I hear Cade holler out, "Daddy, I'm thirsty." And so I went into the kitchen where he had just been drinking a bottle of water. And I take the bottle of water into Cade, and he takes a drink, and he says, "I don't like this water. It doesn't taste like water." I'm like, "Bud, it's bottled water. It's water. I didn't have to go walk and get water out of a dirty well and boil it for you to drink. Boy, you're drinking that water." Right? That's a first world problem. We had bottled water I gave him, and it wasn't good enough. I was at Starbucks this week, and it was packed. It was actually Black Friday, and I'm sitting at Starbucks doing some work, and this guy comes in and he begins to complain. That's the worst Starbucks in front of everyone. This is the worst Starbucks I've ever been to. You never have what I want. I'm like, "Buddy, you're about to pay $6 for a drink." They have all kinds of stuff. This is a first world problem, and you're making a big deal about it. And so I didn't talk about this 5 weeks ago, but kids, now that you're in here, and adults, when you begin to complain, ask yourself, is this a real problem, or is this a first world problem? Do it nicely, kids, if your parents begin to complain. Week 2, your money will lie to you, right? So Paul says, don't put your hope in your wealth, which is uncertain. And that's because your money will lie to you. And what happens is your money will tell you that you'll never have enough. So you'll always feel like, I need more. You feel secure, you feel satisfied, and you think, if I just got one more raise, if I got one more promotion, if I got a better job, your money's going to lie to you and tell you that you never have enough. If you put your hope in money, you'll believe that you can't give big. You'll hold on to your wealth, and you'll think, if I let go of it and actually give it away, what if I need it? What's going to happen when things go bad and I've given it away? So if you put your hope in wealth, you'll believe that you can't give big. It will lie to you. And then the biggest lie I think we believe is that our stuff will satisfy us. That at the deepest core of who we are, if I just get enough, if my wealth gets high enough, if I have enough stuff, then I'm going to be satisfied. And Paul says, no, if you put your hope in wealth, it is uncertain. Week 3, I challenged all of us to be rich givers, and I talked about this sickness that comes on us because of our wealth, this affluenza, that we believe that we deserve and that we should have more because of our wealth. And it's this sickness. And we talked about the only way to become immune to that, the only way to solve that is to become generous. And so I challenge you in 3 ways. I challenge you to make giving a priority. Not just something you do sporadically, but you actually have a plan and you make it a priority to your giving. You give strategically, that you know who you're giving to and why you give to them. And so I've told you, if you don't want to give to this place, if you've been hurt by the church, you've seen the church mismanage money, and so you're not sure if you want to give to Trinity, that's okay. Give somewhere. I even gave you a couple of ideas of places that you could give to, but give strategically. And then the last thing, if you want to be a rich giver, is you have to learn to be content. You will never be a rich giver if you're not content where you're at. Last week, I challenged you guys to be rich in good deeds, to do good and to be rich in good deeds. And I said, look, those good deeds will never save you. So you can't pile up all the good deeds, look at God and say, look, is this enough? Paul says to a church in Ephesus in Ephesians 2, he says, look, it is by grace through faith that you've been saved. This grace that comes to us that we haven't earned, this forgiveness that you can never deserve, by faith, that you actually believe in it. And he says it's not by works so that no man can boast. No one can present themselves to God and say, look how good I am. You can't present yourself to anyone else and say, look, God loves me. Look at all I've done. And so I said, when you are rich in good deeds, I challenge you in 3 ways. I said, you do those things. Let those things point to God, not you. Don't look for the credit of doing those things, but point to God. Jesus even at one point says, look, you, if you follow Jesus, are the light of the world. Let man see your good deeds, and seeing those things, they'll praise your Father in heaven, not you. Not you. I'm telling you, there are people who will disagree with you. There are people who don't believe like you do. But if they see those of us who confess to follow Jesus, if they see us living it out, there's going to be something in them that says, man, I may not believe like you, but I like the way you live. And there must be something more. I told you that when we are rich in good deeds, that it's going to be countercultural. That we're going to be doing some things and people aren't going to get it. People aren't going to understand why you serve like you serve. We have a girl that was in our youth group for many years. Her name was Molly. And I was watching the news this week and reading the feed, and her picture comes up on my Facebook feed through a news channel. And this girl, Molly, she's an older high school student. She went down into Ferguson. Maybe people were judging Ferguson, maybe when people wanted to stay away from Ferguson. She's an unbelievable artist. She said, look, I have a gifting and I want to do something good with it. And so she went down and she started painting on the boards. And she painted Love Will Win. This ended up in Huffington Post. This ended up in the Chicago Tribune. Molly was all over the place because of the way she served. People took notice to it. It's counter-cultural. And I said there's an opportunity to glorify God in and through the church when we do this. That we want people to know that it's because we're followers of Jesus that we do what we do. That we believe the church has the potential and the ability to really have an impact on our community. It's not just going to be something we talk about. That we're not just going to exist in the community, but we are going to exist for our community, and people will take notice. And so there's all kinds of things. I listed some things. There's a bunch of people who work at Coldwater. There's people who serve over at Missouri Hills, which is a home for boys and girls who have got into some trouble. People who work at Team, which is our local food pantry. Lots of you who cook meals for people when someone's sick or has surgery or has a baby. There's all kinds of ways that you're serving and loving. But let me challenge you in one way. I thought about this week. That also has to take place within our building. Like we're really, really good, I think, right now of serving and participating in what God is doing in the kingdom outside of these walls. But there's also this massive opportunity for us to do good and to be rich in good deeds here in this community, on Sunday mornings, on Wednesday nights. Look, we have our kids with us this morning, but usually on Sunday mornings, they're upstairs in a space that's specifically for them, with usually just a couple of adults. It's a massive opportunity for you to do good, to be rich in good deeds by loving our kids, by rocking babies, by hanging out with our toddlers. We have students on Wednesday nights who are coming looking for hope, I promise. And there's an opportunity for you to be a part of our team that loves our junior high and high school students. Every time someone walks through the door and you get a bulletin and someone smiles at you and greets you like you belong here, that's important. There are people who give themselves back in a tech booth or on stage. If you are going to call this your home, there's this expectation, like we talked about this. There's this expectation that we participate, that we're not just consumers, but we contribute to what God is doing. So let me say this, and it's very difficult. Maybe you don't want to hear this. If you call this your home, if you call yourself a partner of Trinity, and you feel like you're only just consuming, may you begin to think about how would you begin to contribute? Call me, talk to me. As you begin to wrestle, what would it look like for you to be a part of what God is doing here, to do good and to be rich in good deeds here? Now, why? Why do we do this? How can we actually make this happen? How to be rich, not how to get rich. How can we be rich? I hope that it's going to be this awareness that we've come to the last 5 weeks. Awareness is this interesting thing. Maybe you've been in the grocery store before and you've gone in looking for one item and then you become aware of another item. Maybe you become aware of an item you didn't know even existed and now all of a sudden you need it. Or maybe if you have little kids and you go to check out and the stores have the racks right by where you check out and your kids become aware of things that all of a sudden they need. There's an awareness that happens that makes us think we need something. That is the goal of a marketer. A marketer wants you to believe that you need what they are selling, that you are going to become aware of what they're selling. And so there's just an awareness of things. Maybe it's an awareness of bad things. Like I still eat McDonald's. I haven't figured out why. I still eat McDonald's. I know it's not good for me. I'm aware that it's bad for me. And I pull into the drive-thru, I get my food, I eat it, and I regret it every time. But here's what's happening with awareness. I think two things normally happen with awareness. We become aware of something and we embrace it. I think God is always working on us to become aware of things in our heart. And if we are becoming aware, we either embrace that and say, all right, well then maybe something needs to change in my heart, or we ignore it. We either embrace it or we ignore it. My hope is as we finish this series, this won't be something you just ignore. That as God begins to tug at your heart about what you have, your wealth, your money, that it won't be something you just ignore, but will be something you embrace. So we have Paul, this guy who doesn't follow Jesus for a long time. He's persecuting Christians. He begins to follow Jesus, and he reaches out all over this part of the world, and then he plants churches, and then he sends people off into these churches to pastor them. And so Timothy's this boy who is out pastoring this church in Ephesus, a really wealthy area. We've talked about this. Timothy, I'm sure at some point comes to Paul, I don't know what to do. They say they love Jesus, but they're holding tight to their money. They're still looking at their money as their security and their satisfaction. What do I do? So that's why Paul writes Timothy and says, here's how you help those who are rich. And this is, Paul kind of tips his hand here at the beginning in verse 17. He says this, command those who are rich in this present world. So even in the very beginning, you get this idea that, well, is there another world? Paul says, look, Timothy, tell them if they're rich in this present world. So automatically right there, we know that Paul must believe that there's another world, that there's something else that's going on, that this isn't it. It's really interesting in a survey done this time last year, 68% of Americans believe in heaven. So my guess is about 70% of you in this room believe in heaven. That's going to be really important as we continue to go through this. He keeps going. Command them not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. In this way. In what way? In the way of being generous, in the way of being willing to share, in the way of doing good deeds. In this way, they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age. They will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age. Now, it sounds like Paul's a little confused here to me. It seems confusing, like if I give my treasure away, how am I going to then lay up treasure for myself? That doesn't make sense. If I give it away, how am I going to get more? But Paul is saying, look, when you do this, you're building a foundation for the coming age, this other world. the world I believe all of us deep at our core are longing for. Paul is pointing to the fact that, look, it's not just the here and now that matters. That when you're generous, when you're willing to share, when you do good, when you're rich in good deeds, it actually is going to benefit you. This is here. It's going to benefit you in the other world. Not that your good deeds will determine where you go, but somehow, I don't fully understand this, but somehow when you get to heaven, if you confess to follow Jesus, if you understand this grace and forgiveness, that when you enter into heaven, somehow you've laid up this treasure for the coming age. Keeps going, so that they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life. I think this is super important. This is maybe one of the most important things here, I think, that Paul shares. Some of us are holding on to what we believe is life, but it's not. We're holding on to things that we think satisfy, things that matter, but they're not. And so Paul says, look, when you do this, when you learn to be rich, what's going to happen is you're going to take hold of the life that is truly life. Not the life that's pretend, not the life that's fleeting, not the life that's false, this true life. But again, many of us think, man, just a little more, and I get a little more, and I hold on to it, and I think this is the life. And then someone gets sick, I lose my job, and everything falls apart. Why? Because don't put your hope in wealth, which is uncertain. Paul says, look, if you want to experience real life, then you have to learn how to be rich. That this has been one of my goals through this whole series, is that you will eventually lose the grip you have on your stuff. That you'll begin to open your hands and live open-handed to the things that you have. Because what happens is when you lose your grip on stuff, your stuff loses its grip on you. When you begin to let go of those things and realize those things don't do anything for me, they'll never satisfy. When I understand that, then that wealth and that money and the stuff loses its grip on me. And look, this wasn't just an idea that Paul comes up with. He's learned this from Jesus. Let's look at an encounter that Jesus has with a group of people. It's found in Luke 12, 13 through 21. Luke 12, 13 through 21. It says this, someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." And Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" This, if we go back just a little bit, this is fascinating. Jesus has just been pouring his heart out. If you go back a few verses, he's been teaching about hypocrisy, he's been teaching something that's very dear and near to his heart. And then all of a sudden you have this guy who comes up and says, "Hey, tell my brother to give me what's mine." Like this happened a lot when I was a junior high and high school pastor, and I would pour my heart out, and then you'd have a junior high or a high schooler come up and be like, "Hey, Kyle, how's it feel to be bald?" Literally, that's happened after I've exposed. Yeah, see, he may have been one of them, yeah. You'll share your heart, and you'll just have this random comment who will come up. And you're thinking, did you hear what I just said? And so you wonder if Jesus has just been sharing, and he's opening up his heart, and then all of a sudden, you have this guy who says, "Hey, tell him to give me what's mine." Verse 15 says, "Then he said to him, 'Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions.'" Look, your life is not determined by what you have. If you're poor, if you don't have much, that does not determine who you are. If you have a lot, if you're really wealthy, that too does not determine who you are. Your life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. Verse 16, then he tells them this parable. So a parable would just be a made-up story that Jesus is going to tell to prove a point. Usually in a parable, someone is the character of God, and then someone is the character of the people who are listening. And so we will be that person who is listening. Verse 16, it says this, told him this parable. "The ground of a certain rich man," so this is about rich people, "produced a good crop, and he thought to himself, 'What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops.' That this guy has had a good year, he's worked really hard, he goes out to harvest, and it's great. It wasn't a down year, it was a good year, and he has an abundance of things. And he says, man, what am I going to do with all my extra? What's interesting is he already probably had extra, and I know he did. So he has extra, and now he's like, man, what do I do with my extra? I don't even know what to do with the abundance of stuff that I have. The crowd's probably leaning in, and they're probably jealous or envious of the guy. Some people are maybe angry. Maybe they don't have anything, and they're thinking this guy is struggling with not knowing what to do with his extra. So what's the guy's solution? Verse 18. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. Look, I have barns full of stuff. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to load it all up. I'm going to put it in boxes. I'm going to put it in barrels, and I'm going to tear down the barns I already have, and I'm going to build bigger barns. And in those bigger barns, I'm going to store my extra. And I'm going to store my extra for later, just in case I need it. And you may be thinking, oh, it's good. I don't have barns, so this maybe is not for me. But here's what I know. I have a basement. I grew up in Oklahoma and didn't have a basement, and so when I got here and I had a basement, it became my barn. It's where I store all my stuff that I don't want to get rid of. My extra. My clothes, you can ask my wife, my clothes I might wear one day are down in my basement, hanging up or in boxes. My extra is in my storage. It was interesting. I did a little study on storage units, and I was looking at zip codes. In our zip code, there's 22 references, 63031 and 63034 for our storage units. The more expensive zip codes, the more storage units there are. One zip code I looked at had about a third of the people, and it had double the storage units. Right? So we see this. What do I do with my extra? And most of us, a lot of us have extra that we're trying to figure out what to do with it. So we have garage sales, we donate to Goodwill, we have extra. Verse 19, and I'll say to myself, you have plenty of good things laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. I mean, he worked really hard, right? I mean, he did his part, he wasn't lazy, and because of his hard work and his discipline, he yielded a good crop. Like if we were to stop here, we'd be like, this is great, this is a good teaching. We work hard, we get much. It's a good teaching on saving. Some of us maybe need to hear a little bit of that it's okay to have this emergency fund for when bad things happen. And so if it was to end here, then it would be okay. But it doesn't. Jesus keeps going, verse 20. But God said to him, you fool. You fool. It's never good to be called a fool, especially by God. The crowd would be pressing in at this point. All right, what is Jesus talking about? Why is Jesus calling him a fool? And this is what he says. This very night, your life will be demanded from you. It's over. This is it. You've reached the end. No more opportunities, no more crops, nothing. It's over. Your money can't save you. Your money will not fix this problem that you have. Your life is being demanded of you. And this is what I know, is death doesn't judge. Death does not wait till you're ready. Death does not wait till you've spent your extra. Death happens. It comes to the rich and the poor and the young and the old. So he says, you fool. You've been storing up all of this, and tonight your life is over. It says this, then who will get what you've prepared for yourself? You fool, you've been doing all this, and now what? Now where does it go? Who gets it? Here's one thing's for sure, he won't take it with him. He will not benefit from it. So he worked hard, he stored up all this stuff, and now what? Now this is the big mistake that he makes. I believe this rich fool, as he's called, had this idea that everything that he came up with, everything he has gotten, he's made this horrible assumption that it's all for him. He's made the horrible assumption that everything he's made, everything he's worked hard is for him and him alone. Verse 21, this is how it will be with anyone who stores up things for himself but is not rich toward God. So Jesus looks out to the crowd and says, it's the same for you. Those of you who are rich, those of us who just store up for ourselves, those of us who believe that everything I make is for me and for my consumption, it's going to be the same for you, because when your life ends, you will give the same amount that this guy gave, everything. When we all die, we all give it all. Jesus said, look, this guy is a fool. He's a fool. And this idea of being rich towards God was a new idea. So during this day and age, people would take an offering, they would take something that was valuable, and they would place it before whatever god they followed. So Zeus, Jupiter, and they would try and bribe them because they thought, if I just bring enough, if I'm rich towards this God, then he'll give me what I need. But Jesus flips it all and says, look, if you want to be rich towards God, here's how you're rich towards God. You're rich towards the people who are made in the image of God. If you want to be rich towards God, you're rich towards those people who are made in the image of God. You're rich to his kids. You're rich to the people that God has created. Kennedy, my daughter, turned 9 a couple weeks ago, and some of our students who have grown up in the youth group who are close to Heather and I took Kennedy out, and they lavished upon her things. They took her to dinner, and they said, look, I know you normally order off the kids' menu. Order off whatever you want. It's yours. Dessert, sure. Whatever you want, it's yours. Them loving my daughter was a way of loving me. So if you want to be rich towards God, we have to figure out how to do that. He goes on, Luke 12, 33 through 34. He's going to continue through this teaching. He says this in verse 33. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. This is one of those we don't really like. Did he really mean that? Did he really mean that we should get rid of some of our stuff to help those who are poor? Jesus says, sell your possessions, give it to the poor. Provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will not be exhausted, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Look, we talk about this all the time. God is after your heart. He's not just after an outward appearance. He is after your heart. And he says, look, whatever you treasure, whatever you see as most important, whatever you see as valuable, that's where your heart's going to go. So this man is a fool. He has extra, and he decides to store it instead of being rich towards God. So yeah, it might be really difficult, but maybe God is asking some of us to downsize. Maybe God is really asking us to get rid of some of our stuff. Maybe God really is asking us to be generous. Maybe God is asking us to spend less on ourselves this Christmas and figure out how to invest in things that matter more. He says, because for where your treasure is, your heart will be also. I just know Jesus knew that the number one contender for your heart was going to be your stuff. I really believe that. I think Jesus knew that it was going to be difficult. That the more you have, the more difficult it will be. So back to Paul, let's finish up. Verse 19, 1 Timothy 6:19. Let's read it again. In this way, they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so they may take hold of the life that is truly life. I hope you're aware. I hope you're aware that maybe the life that you're living isn't truly life. The way you're experiencing with your extra, how we store things and we're not generous really isn't life at all. And I know not everyone in here confesses to follow Jesus, but if you do, if you are here today and you would say, yes, I'm a Christian, I'm a follower of Jesus, this isn't an option. I know that's uncomfortable, but that's not an option. Paul says to Timothy, command them. Command them. Don't suggest, don't advise them. Command them to do this. Following Jesus too often comes about what we think we know or our theology, our belief. It's not just about memorizing Scripture. It is this radical, different life of following the ways of Jesus. That's what it is about. And you won't regret it. You won't regret it. If you do, you can tell me when you're in a hospital, when you're sick, you can say, look, I regret being generous. You can tell me that. You can tell me I was wrong. But I've never heard it. Buyer's remorse happens. Some of you are experiencing it from Friday. Buyer's remorse happens. But I promise, I've never given to someone, I've never been generous and regretted it. You won't regret it. You won't regret it. So our goal, those of us who call Trinity our home, is to be generous. Is to lead the way with radical generosity, and you're invited to be a part of that. You're invited to, at the end of your life, know that you had taken hold of what truly is life, that you've laid up this foundation in another world by the good you've done. Just pray with me. God, thanks for today. First of all, thank you for our kids. I love looking out, and I totally believe that our children have the potential to change our world now. That the problems and the struggles we have, the hate that people have, the selfishness that people have, I have hope that our kids will put an end to a lot of those things. I pray they'll put an end to a lot of those things because they'll know as a young child the love that you have for them, and that they will live a radical life of following you. God, would you help us this morning as we wrestle with this, as we become more and more aware of our riches? Would you help us to live out what you've called us to do? May we be generous people. Help us to be good at being rich. Praise in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Love you guys. See you next week.